Okay, we're going through quotes from the Holy Grail Wisdom Quotes book by me, Pete Rogers, alphabetical order. Next person's Jack Valenti. He ran the USA motion picture industry for a while. He was a World War II hero. He was an advertising man. He worked for JFK and LBJ. I only got two quotes from. First one is, never humiliate an antagonist and never desert a friend. So basically, you don't get anything by pissing people off and insulting people. That's what stupid people do. Usually if you insult somebody, all you do is piss them off more, and they'll maybe just give you more of a hard time. So sometimes, I hate to say it, but you have to take a little shit and just let it go. Because unless it's worth really making a big fuss about, sometimes you just take a lesson and you learn, okay? A lot of times there's not much you could do. So you have to use your judgment. You know, the goal is not to win a 5-minute argument. The goal is to win long term. And if you want to win long term, you have to calm down your emotions and say, what's the best way to handle this that'll have the best long term outcome? Okay? So you don't want to be petty and make a little thing into a big thing. Because also, a lot of times what I've noticed too is somebody can do something very nasty to you, and they won't even remember that they did something nasty to you. But if you do something nasty back to them, they'll remember you did that. The point being is, you might be better off just letting it go, and you'll actually end up getting along with that person and being okay with them, and things will be fine. So you got to judge for yourself the individual situation, but I have found that is often true. Next for Jack Valenti. It's kind of like the Christian thing too. I'd rather reconcile a situation by becoming friends with a person, even though what they did was not cool, versus escalating the argument and the fuss for no reason, okay, just because you're pissed off at the moment. Okay, Jack Valenti, if you can't, and also by having a sense of superiority, I think that helps. You don't have to tell the other person you feel superior to them, but sometimes some petty, nasty, stupid person will do something nasty to me. Okay, and they could just do it because they're in a bad mood, or they're jealous, or they resent me. I'll just be polite and I'll avoid them, and eventually I'll find I often get along with them pretty well later. I don't take it so personally. You know, it's kind of like, I think Rodney Dangerfield, had the joke that, the fly may bite a horse, but the fly is still a fly and the stallion is still a stallion, okay? So some low-life person might do something very nasty, insulting, and rude to me, but, they're still a low-life. I'm still who I am. So I'll just let it go, and I'll end up getting along with them just fine a year later, 2 years later, in most cases. Sometimes you have to respond. They do something so egregious. You have to, But use your judgment. Most of the time, the important thing is to win long term. Okay, a lot of times, too, I say to myself, too, the patient is the one with the disease, okay? So if a patient is very rude to you, or anybody's really rude to you, I say the reason they're very rude to me is because they're a stupid, savage, moron, idiot. Okay, it's not my fault. I don't like them being very rude to me, but I can avoid them in the future. They have to live with themselves, so they can live with themselves. I'm not going to try to correct them because they're probably too stupid to correct themselves, so I'll just excuse myself from the situation and not talk to them again. Okay, next quote by Jack Valenti. If you cannot protect what you own, you don't own anything. Okay, next we're going to do Vincent van Gogh, the Dutch, and then he went to France, French painter. He made some pretty good paintings, but there's some interesting things about him as well we'll talk about. He became more isolated after 1889 and increased the intensity of his landscape paintings. Before that, his paintings were more boring, a lot of peasants in the fields. In 1889, he made the Starry Night, and that is an entertaining painting. He didn't sell hardly any paintings in his whole life. He said, I cannot help it that my pictures do not sell. Nevertheless, the time will come when people will see that they are worth more than the price of the paint. Conscience is a man's compass. What am I in the eyes of most people? A nobody, an eccentric, or an unpleasant person? All right then, even if that is true, then I should one day like to show my work, what such an eccentric nobody has in his heart. Okay, so here's a good quote by Goethe, the German writer. Personality is everything in art and poetry. Yeah, that's a sign that it's unique. It has the unique personality of the artist. Another quote by Goethe, to produce the smallest creative work, I need absolute solitude. That's also true. Creative writers and painters, they want time alone so they can just work on their projects, bring their ideas to life. Okay, one last quote. This one's by Dave Trott. He wrote, Van Gogh was treated as a fool in his lifetime, and he died a pauper. Never sold a painting to a gallery and couldn't get an exhibition. Yet after he died, the same paintings were suddenly considered genius and worth millions. Whether a painting is any good or not is decided by a small, influential group of critics and gallery owners. Yeah, there was some lady, she might even have been related to him, and she did a great job of marketing his paintings after he died. So it's too bad she couldn't have done that while he was alive. But it's also true, a lot of like what the public thinks is just because they're stupid, and they'll believe any famous so-called pseudo-expert. For example, Leonardo da Vinci is a crappy artist, okay? But he's one of the most famous artists because he gets all this publicity. I think it's mostly because he's an anti-Christian homosexual, okay? He's totally overrated. He's nothing compared to Michelangelo and Raphael. He doesn't even have one good painting that anyone would want. The Mona Lisa is disgusting. It looks like an ugly transvestite. Nobody would want that on their bedroom wall in their dorm room. Okay, nobody would want that on their wall in their house. It's ugly. It's repulsive. Okay, that's his most famous painting. It's a piece of crap. Okay, look at Picasso. Picasso was a fake. Why does he get all this publicity? Because he's a member of the Communist Party, okay? So what I'm trying to say is a lot of these so-called famous paintings, modern art, it's all fake. But be that as it may, I do think Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night was good, and some of his other paintings were okay. But, he's nothing special. He's not one of the, the top 100 artists. But he was decent. He was a little bit interesting. Anyways, hope you found that interesting.